Elmer Gantry the girls don't talk about anymore. And nobody's talking about Gene Simmons in that movie, who's one of my favorite actresses ever, and is in my favorite musical scene of all time, which is in Guys and Dolls, and she's drunk in Cuba with Marlon Brando, who we'll talk about today. God, I feel alone. Hi, I'm Louis Virtel, and I'm your resident Academy Awards historian, so today I'll be rattling off my favorite, most egregious snubs in the Best Actor category because, as we all know, the trophy doesn't always go to the right person. This is Trophy Strife. Now, I had to look this up, but did you know that actors can also be men? I had to have this confirmed via the internet. I was dubious. But there are many actors, and sometimes they're in movies we even like, and we're invested in their, get this, emotions. I'm bowled over already. We'll get into it in this episode. Marlon Brando doesn't win for A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951. Now, in this episode, I'll be focusing mainly on people who weren't even nominated, but this is such an egregious loss in the category, such a famous performance, such a turning point in movies, that it has to make the list. For the same reason that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf did not win the Pulitzer Prize because they thought it was too dark and gritty to win, basically beneath the standards of the theater, even though it was changing the theater, I think people were afraid of what Marlon Brando was doing to acting. It was not traditional. They frankly weren't secure enough to call it greatness. Marlon Brando is somebody who brought the method to the screen. He also brought chaos wherever he went. Marlon Brando originated the role of Stanley Kowalski in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire alongside lovely actress Jessica Tandy, who you might know from later in life winning the Oscar for Driving Miss Daisy. But before that, she was being driven up a wall by Marlon Brando, who was one of the most chaotic actors ever to live. Jessica Tandy called Marlon Brando an impossible, psychopathic bastard. But she also admitted he had, quote, unusual ability as an actor, and that is extremely true. Marlon Brando in this movie pops off the screen, and not just because he is devastatingly attractive and basically invented the idea of being hot. With all respect to Gene Kelly, I think we perfected it with Marlon Brando. In this movie, he's full of rage, shocking impulses, he's really dangerous seeming, but also he's delivering this very specific dialogue with a very specific, ominous cadence. You can see how he intimidates the characters around him. There seems to be a walking on eggshells vibe when you're dealing with this character. So the truth is, before Marlon Brando, there were actors who brought quote-unquote reality to the screen and were quote-unquote grounded. Not everybody was, Joan Crawford shrieking at her daughter for existing.
Zita, don't talk like that.
I'm really not surprised.
Maybe that's why, Father.
Some people actually did seem like people you might run into on the street and bring a kind of real rage or real angst to the drama that they were playing. Honestly, James Stewart qualifies. If you watch him in any of his movies from the 30s or 40s, he's way more grounded than many of his contemporaries. In fact, this movie is kind of a battle between quote-unquote new acting and old traditional acting. Vivien Leigh in this movie is walking around kind of delivering monologues to herself, almost giving a tragic portrait of an actress stuck in her own world. Marlon Brando, meanwhile, is constantly jolting her to the present, jolting her to reality, a very depressing reality for her. So there's a lot of inherent tragedy in this movie before you even get to the disgusting events that unfold later. This year, Humphrey Bogart won for The African Queen, which is not his most towering performance. Marlon Brando would, of course, go on to win 2 Oscars for On the Waterfront and The Godfather, but I don't think he would ever match the carnal urgency and sheer shock value of this performance. I don't think there's a more explosive performance of the 1950s. When you're talking about performances that change our idea of what realism is, this has to come up first. Anthony Perkins isn't nominated for Psycho, 1960. Now, Anthony Perkins was an interesting actor to emerge in the 1950s. He had sort of an effete quality. He would dress in shirts like the one I'm wearing. What I'm saying is something queer was going on. Now, at the time in the 1950s, I think machismo really dominated leading male roles. People like Kirk Douglas are emerging, James Dean, people who have a lot of anger, a lot of rage, and are engaging because of how unhinged they are, really. But Anthony Perkins was used to softer roles. He was nominated for an Oscar in the supporting category in 1956 for Friendly Persuasion, where he plays Gary Cooper's son, LOL, who objects to the horrors of war. He cries on camera. It's one of those nominations. It's actually a really moving performance, but there just aren't many roles like that for people like that. Alfred Hitchcock saw something in Anthony Perkins that I don't think anybody else did, which is weird depth, something in the eyes that is constantly searching. And frankly, I think Hitchcock liked to see attractive people in peril, and he just wanted to see those very sharp eyebrows be about as furrowed as they can be. I think what prevents Anthony Perkins from getting a nomination this year is the presence of all these other longtime legend people, these big traditional swings from famous actors. The amazing thing about what he does in Psycho, which if you haven't seen it, please just shut off the video and start watching it. His performance is so intriguing. You have no idea what this character is doing, what he's thinking about, why he's so worried, why he's such a pervert, if any of it adds up, that you're distracted from what is kind of an obvious conclusion. He is at the heart of these murders. In fact, the intrigue in Janet Leigh's performance is watching her study him, and she did get an Oscar nomination for this movie. It's really mind-blowing. We could do a whole episode about the Hitchcock movies that deserved more acting Oscar nominations. There are so few, and in fact, there's only one win, Joan Fontaine for Suspicion. Cary Grant and James Stewart, whose careers were basically defined by Alfred Hitchcock for a number of years, weren't nominated for any of his movies. Ingrid Bergman, not nominated for Notorious, Tallulah Bankhead, not nominated for Lifeboat, and Anthony Perkins, clearly in the role of his career, was not nominated for Psycho. Anthony Perkins would have somewhat interesting roles later in life. Soon after this, he was in Orson Welles' visually interesting, but not that interesting, The Trial, based on the Kafka book, and also Murder on the Orient Express, and also Crimes of Passion, where he proved he knew what poppers were. You'll look that up, and that's going to be a whole new world for you. But he never got the chance again to be as deep, strange, and somehow at the heart of it all, kind of relatable in Psycho. I can't compare it to any other performance in Hitchcock's oeuvre or anywhere else. Sidney Poitier isn't nominated for A Patch of Blue, 1965. All I can say about this movie is it shouldn't work. It's about a young girl who is blind, whose mother treats her horrifically, played by Shelley Winters in an Oscar-winning and very two-dimensional role. This actress, Elizabeth Hartman, who is fabulous in the movie, one of my favorite nominations of the 60s, ends up meeting Sidney Poitier by accident in the park. She, of course, cannot see that he is black, and they strike up a romantic friendship that is very ambiguous. I can't really compare it to any other movie. But Sidney Poitier takes this role in which he's a bit of a white knight, if you will, and makes it so lived in. There's always a quality of Sidney Poitier where even if he's given a sort of stock hero role, there's a look of discernment in his eyes, maybe even sarcasm, where he can side-eye the tropes of the part while also playing the greatness of the part. Nobody was able to casually play conscience like Sidney Poitier, and that is never more apparent than in A Patch of Blue, a movie you need to watch and then come back to me, and you'll be like, Louis, you were right. I don't know why I even stopped listening to the video. I should have kept watching the video and then watched the movie. Sidney Poitier is, of course, a legend, and of course, an Oscar winner. Only 2 years before this, he won the Best Actor Oscar for Lilies of the Field, where he brought joy and his record collection to a group of nuns. He was also nominated in the 50s for The Defiant Ones, but otherwise, Sidney Poitier is not as awarded as you think he is. He didn't get anything for To Sir with Love. He didn't get anything for Blackboard Jungle. Nothing for In the Heat of the Night. And this, I think, is his best movie of the 1960s, A Patch of Blue. Now, with all due respect to the filmography of Jane Fonda, Cat Ballou, starring Oscar winner Lee Marvin from that year, is very amusing, and he gets to play a dual role, which is actually a rarity in the Best Actor category. But it's more an amusing gimmick than an Oscar-worthy role. Luckily, an actor of color was nominated that year, Laurence Olivier in Othello. Don't look it up.
I am to blame.
Okay, this is a biggie for me. Donald Sutherland is not nominated for Ordinary People, 1980. Oscar fans, namely gay ones, for generations have had to deal with the fact that people are obsessed with Raging Bull and think it was robbed of the Best Picture Oscar from Ordinary People. I don't know what family dramas people have absorbed over the years that they think are better than Ordinary People. To me, this is the top, the Yale of family dramas. I am blown away when people don't like this movie, where every character is full of mismatched intentions, they're confused, they're full of love, they're full of angst, they're lonely, they're connecting, they're disconnecting, there's so much going on. It's such an impressive directorial debut for Robert Redford, and Donald Sutherland is key to its success. First of all, you've got Timothy Hutton in the main role, who mysteriously wins the Best Supporting Actor Oscar, even though he's in almost every frame of this movie. It's the worst case of category fraud ever, but honestly, I'm glad it's a performance with an Oscar. You have Mary Tyler Moore as this stony mother who's lost her other son and can't cope and is pulling away and is so... I'm like shriveling even talking about what she does in this movie. She's so fearsome and so allegedly still alive, yet walking around zombified in her beige clothes all the time. You've also got Judd Hirsch in a nominated supporting performance, doing fabulous work as Timothy Hutton's therapist. And then Donald Sutherland, who by the way has never been nominated for an Oscar, Not for Clute, where he plays the titular Clute, Don't Look Now, or MASH. He's a father grieving the loss of his son. He's beginning to get in touch with his emotions, which he expresses in conversations with the Timothy Hutton character, but he's also a bit stoic himself, and so he still kind of relates to his wife, who's handling this trauma horrifically. Now, if Timothy Hutton gets to consider himself a supporting actor, I guess Donald Sutherland might be in the supporting actor category too. I don't know whether they would have characterized Donald Sutherland as lead or supporting, but for argument's sake, let's say it's actor. It is a stacked category that year. You've got John Hurt in The Elephant Man. You've got Peter O'Toole in The Stunt Man. Robert De Niro as Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull. Still probably the pinnacle of his career, the definitive, most memorable performance he ever did in a career of amazing performances, until we get to one in a second. The ironic thing is, Robert Duvall did get a nomination for The Great Santini, where he's also a suburban dad who's sort of mishandling how to treat human beings, his own family, his wife, everybody. But I think Donald Sutherland brings more soul and interesting contemplation to the part. His final argument with Mary Tyler Moore, where she is devastated by what he is saying, has such quiet power and integrity, and I don't know, you can just picture it happening in the cul-de-sac next to you. Donald Sutherland commented on this snub, and also all of his snubs, and he said, "I'm not surprised, I know that community, and I didn't expect a nomination." I just want to say that that's a giant community, so I don't know how he pissed off that many people. I'm very confused, but well done, and I loved you in Pride and Prejudice. Robert De Niro is not nominated for the King of Comedy 1982. This isn't much of a surprise since it was not commercially successful, particularly for Martin Scorsese. But this to me is definitely the most interesting performance Robert De Niro ever gave, and also the most creepily real. I know these people are on Twitter right now. This is about a budding comedian, I say that generously. He's a psycho who will do whatever it takes to get in front of people, to be a Tonight Show-like presence. And what that means is he will kidnap the host of something resembling The Tonight Show. That guy's played by Jerry Lewis. He sits at home pretending he hosts a famous talk show. He sits in waiting rooms waiting for people to take his comedy tape. He will stop at nothing and has no other desires in life. Everything that isn't getting on television is a distraction. I will say about this movie coming out at the time, it's a slow burn. I think it takes a couple of viewings to embrace how dark the movie is and how dark it wants to be. This isn't an accident. Obviously compared to Taxi Driver, which has a lot of harrowing plot and a harrowing lead character, and Mean Streets, which is a lot of brawling in a bar that seems very realistic and like, I don't want to get in a fight like that. I think compared to Martin Scorsese's earlier movies, which are filled with weird anti-heroes, this guy still stands out as too gross to even look at, let alone like. And I think it takes a couple of times to really embrace how dark the movie is and wants to be. Even Roger Ebert, when he first reviewed it, wasn't sure about the world in which this movie existed, and later he came to realize it was one of his favorite Martin Scorsese movies. For a movie that does not have a single pleasant moment within it, I love this film. You're just so grateful when it's over, because you can't sit in that creepy unpleasantness that long. And by the way, it's a short movie, so I think Martin Scorsese was being considerate of everybody. But the weird thing is, Robert De Niro would be nominated in his career for playing weirdos or psychopaths. I mean, look at Cape Fear. That's a really, really fun role. Sort of similar unhinged quality, but there's something lurking and sure about Rupert Pupkin, the comedian he plays in this movie. Like he knows already how it's going to end in his favor. I will say that 1982 is an incredible Best Actor year. You've got Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie. It's so rare that a broad comedy performance gets a lead actor nomination. Jack Lemmon in the pretty underrated film Missing. Paul Newman, one of his greatest latter-day performances in The Verdict, even though it was written by David Mamet, somebody who I just don't like hearing about anymore. And speaking of crazy showbiz types, you also have Peter O'Toole playing a fabulous debaucherous showbiz legend in My Favorite Year. The winner that year was Ben Kingsley in Gandhi, which also, of course, took Best Picture. I can see that there's not a lot of room for Robert De Niro here, but honestly, it's so creepy, it's so strange, it's so true to life, it's so people who will stop at nothing, tweet at everything to get what they want. Paul Giamatti is not nominated for Sideways, 2004. Luckily, we had this past year where Paul Giamatti finally got a Best Actor nomination for The Holdovers, where he played a downtrodden but wise and witty academic type. Now, you might think, Paul Giamatti can always play people like that. He looks like he was born to play people like that. But honestly, he was born to play almost everybody. And I think because he makes it look easy, people underestimate how good he is at his job. And in Sideways, where he plays an insufferable wine snob who has very few friends, and they're even on the fence about him, audiences may have been resistant to how icky he is, but at the same time, he's also so winning as a protagonist. He's so realistic that you think to yourself, I probably have met this guy or have ignored this guy several times in my own life. This is also a case where the supporting actors got nominations and he didn't, so it feels extra egregious. Thomas Hayden Church picked up a nomination, Virginia Madsen picked up a nomination, and yet nothing for Paul Giamatti, who lost out to Jamie Foxx in Ray, Don Cheadle in Hotel Rwanda, Johnny Depp in Finding Neverland, Leonardo DiCaprio in The Aviator, and Clint Eastwood in $1 Million Baby. All I can say about these performances is they draw more attention to the nobility, heroism, or craziness of their lead characters, and maybe that means they're bigger performances compared to Paul Giamatti, but that does not mean Paul Giamatti should have missed out. I absolutely would have taken Clint Eastwood out of this occasion. And in fact, I would have taken $1 Million Baby out of the Oscars race altogether. Luckily, Paul Giamatti seems to have a lot of sense of humor about his past in Hollywood, about his snubs. He did get nominated in the supporting category the year after for Cinderella Man. But man, I hope he has 4 or 5 more nominations in his career, because we can't take for granted how special and droll what he brings to the screen is. He had a really smart quote about the whole situation. He said, "The harder thing for me to deal with was other people's disappointment. My agents were heartbroken and their sorrow weighed heavily on me. I grapple with disappointing people all the time. It's a thing I've tried to grow out of. Here's the thing, I never expected it. I didn't think I deserved it either." If you grapple with disappointing people, become an actor. You will solve all your problems that way. Thanks for watching this episode of Trophy Strife, where I talked about men for like 10 minutes. I can't believe it. Do you hate me for not talking about Leonardo DiCaprio? Are you also in love with Anthony Perkins? Bet you don't have a poster of him in your bathroom like I do. If there are any snubs you think I should have mentioned that I didn't mention, put them in the comments. But again, you're talking to me about men, and do I want to get into that conversation? Who's to say?